In the 12 months since Governor Gary Herbert signed Utah's Sound Money Act into law, the effects of quantitative easing have continued to devalue the U.S. dollar, while gold and silver have continued to climb. Following up on this law in 2012, the Utah legislature passed House Bill 157, reinforcing the end of state capital gains taxes for gold and silver. Economists from around the world are closely watching this Utah sound money experiment, including several Italian bankers who are carefully considering their options.
Well, that's what's going on around the country right now.
We've had people from China, from Japan, from Australia, from England, Germany.
Representative Brad Galvez was the driving force behind House Bill 317, better known as the Sound Money Act, which made gold and silver legal tender in Utah in March 2011.
I took the bill and moved forward with it, ran with it. Because I had been studying monetary policy, I was very supportive of the principles associated with it.
Although gold and silver are now again legal currency in Utah, there is a problem. Under the Sound Money Act, coins must be treated at face value. That is, the value or lack of value stamped right on the coin. For example, this golden eagle is stamped $50, but its present value is far greater, closer to $1,800. For U.S. government coins to really work as currency, values must be determined by the weight of precious metals contained within them. Utah's Sound Money Act only recognizes gold and silver coins issued by the U.S. Treasury. This was done deliberately to ensure no arguments would arise regarding the constitutionality of Utah's new law. After all, how can the federal government refuse to honor its own coins? There is no mention in the Constitution gold and silver coins must be minted in the United States. Article 1, Section 8 simply states Congress has the power to coin money, and later Section 10 directs no state shall coin money. This last section represents the difficulty facing Utah or any other state desiring to mint its own currency.
There was not and there need not have been a national monetary policy.
Section 10 also states no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. The federal government is not mentioned. So, President Nixon put the states in a constitutional dilemma when he took the United States off the gold standard in 1971. But even though the federal government can accept other forms of payment, the states still cannot, which is why the federal government's action effectively forced the states into a de facto violation of the Constitution. That was 40 years ago, before the advent of modern electronic transactions. Most here now agree on one thing. Without meaningful talks in Washington, there is only one way to fix the problem: for states to take the specific powers they do have back into their own hands.
What can we put in place now that allows our people to preserve the purchasing power of their earnings and savings, that allows them to then have a medium of exchange going forward?
The states, I think, have the obligation to create an alternative monetary system just in case the dollar collapses, and monetary history suggests that the dollar will collapse.
All of this makes the present situation even more untenable for the states. After all paper currencies in history have failed.
Under the classical gold standard, you had paper circulating as currency backed by real metal that is sitting in the vault. And today what you have are paper backed by a question mark.
Over the past few years, as more and more fiat currency has been pumped into the system under the guise of quantitative easing, the message becomes even clearer.
If you just look at the data, it's a matter of math and history. You know, $15 trillion debt, $211 trillion unfunded obligations, the total fiscal gap bringing all the total revenues, total expenses forward, overspending by $1 trillion a year. I mean, that's just a matter of math.
We've already reached the stage where the U.S. government is borrowing more money than the market is willing to lend to it, with the consequence that the Federal Reserve has stepped in and introduced this policy of quantitative easing.
The latest term for money printing isn't printing at all. Rather, it's a way of creating digital currency. But it does have the same effect as printing money. This becomes more and more evident as the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar begins to erode further and further with each additional round of quantitative easing. The term itself can easily be seen as an attempt by the Federal Reserve to mislead the public.
Now think about what's happening here in the United States as we look at that chart. The U.S. government is spending huge amounts of money. It's creating huge deficits.
In this graph, covering the past 60 years, national currencies jumped steadily up against crude oil. But the flat line at the bottom represents gold, holding its value consistently over time. Take a look at the right side of the graph since 2006. It's no wonder the Fed doesn't want these numbers released to the public.
This is an indication of how bad currencies, not just the dollar, but how bad currencies are losing purchasing power.
From Rome to Holland to France to Germany and more recently Argentina and Zimbabwe, the outcome has always been the same. But this latest incident has never been seen before. So many countries at once. Everyone knows about Ireland, Greece, and Portugal, but Spain and Italy are in a similar boat. Then there's Great Britain and, of course, Japan, which has been in stagflation for the past 2 decades. This, says this panel, is all the more reason America's states need to begin setting themselves apart from the Federal Reserve now. Nobody knows what the outcome of charts like this will be, but if history is any indicator, we're in for the perfect economic storm.
What we're dealing with here now is not a cyclical problem. We're dealing with a structural problem. And this is exactly what you see when a fiat currency is ready to hyperinflate.
The problem is not that the government controls the monetary system. If only that were the case. The problem is that the bankers control the quantity of money. And that's what we have to take back.
Those in attendance here say get prepared because the economic situation is likely to get worse, much worse. James Turk concludes his address to the summit. In the 1950s, he says his father could fill the family car for $2 silver, a fact which still applies today when those silver dollars are valued for the silver contained in them. The silver didn't lose value, just the dollars the silver is measured in.
We go back to what the framers of the Constitution left us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Perhaps the best way to show you is through a simple example. Let's say these glasses are the equivalent of dollars already in circulation, and the water contained in them is equivalent to their value. Then along come these new dollars, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. They have to get their value from somewhere, and that value comes from the dollars already in circulation, which causes all of the dollars to go down in value. It's not a glass half empty philosophy. These glasses really are half empty. What it does is steal the purchasing power from anyone holding US dollars, and it lessens foreign debt by repaying it in devalued dollars. Watch out, China.
They can wipe out their own debt with monetary inflation so that every dollar the government owes you as a creditor is worth less in terms of its buying power.
Economics professor Richard Ebeling says China is the largest foreign holder of U.S. debt, and this debt is slowly being diminished through each round of quantitative easing. Of course, this doesn't upset the average American until they realize their dollars are being diminished too.
Paradoxically, where did paper money first get used? In China. And it was by an emperor who wanted to confiscate the wealth of his subjects.
Ebeling believes the destruction of the U.S. dollar is at hand.
I fear serious and severe price inflation, far more than anything we're experiencing now, and a possible financial and economic meltdown in the United States.
The only possible way out, says Ebeling, would involve spending cuts to some 90% of government programs. An idea Ebeling says there's not much chance any politician would promote for fear of political suicide. Ebeling says without the cuts, we'll likely see rioting when the dollar collapses. Now or later, those protests are coming.
For any American citizen, even if right now only legally the people in Utah, to be able to find an alternative avenue to go about saving and the affairs of business outside of what will be a worthless money, this is a great step for the state of Utah.
Since an expected collapse of the U.S. dollar hasn't happened yet, there is still time for people to prepare. One of the more popular ideas avoids minting coins altogether.
Depositing your coins in a depository, having a debit card, having other ways of electronically using and spending gold and silver in a much more fluid manner.
Ken Ivory is passionate about this solution. The same way computers allow you to spend U.S. dollars in Europe by converting your debit card purchases from one currency to another on the spot.
You could actually take your silver dollar that's in your pocket now, go in to deposit it. They would give you a debit card, not for the face value, but for the market value, and then you would use that debit card to transact.
For Utah residents, they get the convenience of a debit card without the hassle of carrying around a pouch full of coins.
It'll be pretty heavy to carry it around, wouldn't it?
The best part is there's no way for a central bank to devalue gold or silver. They can't run printing presses to make more of it, so the currency remains stable. And for Utah residents, the Sound Money Act is working as a shot across the bow of the Federal Reserve. States may not have much power to control currency by themselves, but working in tandem with other states, there could be an alternative currency to the U.S. dollar at the state level.
You get Utah working with Idaho, working with Arizona, working with Georgia, working with South Carolina, standing up as the states.
At last count, at least a dozen other states have begun their journey down the road to join Utah. Principal among them was Colorado, but the 2012 general session saw Colorado Democrats defeat a bill aimed at remonetizing gold and silver there. Whether or not other states can band together in light of this latest setback remains to be seen, but for the moment, Utah stands alone as the only state where gold and silver offer a sound money alternative. For SALT TV, I'm Andrew Stack.